Take that to our top story. Theresa May has told MPs there is a consensus on how the UK should deal with Russia. Just doesn't extend to the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, but has the government taken the right approach? Joined from Westminster by The Guardian columnist and author Owen Jones and the executive director of the Henry Jackson Society, Alan Mendoza. Hello to you both. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Sky News this afternoon. Owen, to you first of all. Mr Corbyn sticking by his guns in the House of Commons this afternoon and being roundly condemned, not least by many on his own side.
Well, there's nothing like the political and media elite when there's groupthink and the very few voices who stand up, as they did during the Iraq War, Libya, Helmand Province, on and on and on, to get ridicule and then often to be vindicated. What I would say is this: it's welcome that the Conservatives have capitulated to Labour on the so-called Magnitsky Act, that is to crack down on dirty money from Russia. The fact that this city is a playground, basically, for Russian oligarchs is a disgrace. It is notable that the Conservative Party is awash with hundreds of thousands of pounds of Russian-linked money. And what we need to see, though, now is the actual details of that Magnitsky Act. Let's bear in mind that in the past, for example, on the poisoning of Litvinenko many years ago, Theresa May dragged her heels on that inquiry for so-called diplomatic reasons. When sanctions were to be imposed against Russia in the aftermath of the Ukraine crisis, and a leaked document showed the Conservatives trying to dilute sanctions against Russia on the basis that it would hurt the interests of the City of London, which is awash, as I've said, with Russian-linked dirty money. So actually, Labour took a strong line on the Magnitsky Act. The Conservatives resisted their position. And now the issue is, do we have in law drafted an amendment which will crack down on that dirty money? Because that's what's going to get them where it hurts. It's welcome those diplomats have been expelled. What will happen there is tit for tat. British diplomats will be expelled, all very reminiscent of the Cold War. But what we'll really get at what is a dirty, thuggish, criminal gangster regime in Russia, which is full of oligarchs, which, as Jeremy Corbyn said himself today, have plundered their own country and got billions of pounds in the process. The way to get them where it hurts is to get that act in practice, but that will hurt the financial interests of the sector, the City of London, that fund the Conservative Party. So we've got to hold their feet to the fire, the Conservative government, because the question is, will they act decisively? And we want sequestrations, if necessary, the confiscation of property, and also the expulsion of any oligarch which is linked to the Russian regime. OK. Alan Mendoza, getting rid of these Russian oligarchs, etc., and also land-grabbing funds from these oligarchs if they shouldn't be here, using London as a playground. Will that do it?
Well, that will certainly be a start, but let's just start from where Owen started, which was Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn was condemned not because he was brave, but because he was wrong. He wanted to dither, he wanted to dally, and members of his own party quite rightly pointed out that when there's been a breach of national security, when British citizens have been attacked on British soil, you cannot dither, you cannot dally once you've explored the evidence. You need to respond, and that is why he was condemned. Nothing to do with being brave. It was a foolish move on his part, and he's been exposed by his own party for doing so. But to go back to Owen's point on the Magnitsky Act, it is very important that we have this amendment. It's been pushed for a long time. It's quite right that MPs like Chris Bryant have put this forward, suggested this should be in legislation, but this has been a long sort of history to it. As you remember, Sergei Magnitsky was murdered back in 2008. There's been a global push for this sort of thing in order to stop corrupt Russian officials and others, by the way, who have been guilty of human rights abuses from taking advantage of safe havens like London has been in the past to store money and to act with impunity. It's an important step, but it won't be just the only step. I think the government needs to look at the unexplained wealth orders, to actually impose some of these, to look at assets already in Britain from people who clearly could not have amassed them through legitimate means. Lots of Russians have bought things in London which cannot be explained by their salaries alone. It's time we held them to account, as well as increasing the pressure on the diplomatic front and at the United Nations to call Russia to account for its behaviour, not just in this instance, but in other instances which it's done over the past few years.
Our politicians need to offer a united front as far as that's concerned. I've seen this letter, I'm sure you've seen it as well, hastily drawn up from the front benches and others within the Labour Party, backing the Pre-M's view that Russia definitely culpable and taking a very different line to Jeremy Corbyn. Also hearing that Jeremy Corbyn was actually briefed this morning by the security services on what they knew about what was going on in Salisbury, who does seem to be pretty isolated just at the moment.
Well, firstly, Alan Mendoza makes the point there about dithering. It's the Conservative Party that dithered. That's the whole point. The so-called Magnitsky Act to tackle Russian dirty money was itself proposed by the Labour Party. The Conservative Party, for so-called technical reasons, refused to accept it. It's only now they're talking about it. The history of the Conservative Party has been, for example, to dilute sanctions against Russia on the basis it would damage the City of London, which bankrolls the Conservative Party. As for having a so-called United Front, I remember all too well the Iraq War, which the Henry Jackson Society and its key figures were principal cheerleaders on. I remember Libya, when we were told that anybody who opposed the Libyan war was a disgrace, was a stooge for Colonel Gaddafi. And Helmand Province, that anybody who opposed or criticised the government's stance on the basis that we should be united as a country against, and anybody else was a stooge of Saddam Hussein, of Colonel Gaddafi, of the Taliban. And what happened with the attempt to bully people into silence was those people who still now walk the stage of politics and who are splashed across the media as statesmen, as sensible, hard-nosed individuals who understand reality, while all the people, like Jeremy Corbyn, every single time who was vindicated is portrayed as a traitor and a coward. It was Jeremy Corbyn who was standing isolated then back in the 1980s when Britain backed Saddam Hussein as he gassed the Kurds. It was him who was one of those arrested opposing apartheid South Africa, whilst the Conservatives said they were a terrorist organisation. It was him, yes, who opposed the Iraq War, with the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people and the deaths of 189 or so British service personnel. And yes, one of about 6 MPs who opposed the war in Libya, which turned that place into a safe haven for Islamist extremists, fanatics and ISIS, and we saw the rise of ISIS across Iraq, of course, as well. The same people, over and over again, who are the architects of the biggest foreign policy catastrophes of all time, are still treated as sensible, moderate, hard-nosed people like the Henry Jackson Society, and in any decent world or society with any justice, these people would have absolutely no credibility on any subject whatsoever, and yet they still walk the stage as though we should treat them seriously, when Jeremy Corbyn was far more right than they were on the biggest foreign policy calls of our time, and I think they should be a little bit more humble about it.
OK, Alan, so there. And also I'm hearing that Aaron Banks, who, of course, bankroll UKIP, is also supporting Jeremy Corbyn's stance, so he's not just whistling in the wind on his own.
No, that's a perfect bedmate for him on this sort of issue. Owen's just listed a whole raft of things that he thinks Jeremy Corbyn was right on. Jeremy Corbyn's been wrong on many, many issues. The IRA, Hamas, Hezbollah, and indeed some of the issues he's mentioned there. The proximate reason for the Iraq War, Libya, various issues. We don't have time to get into this. This is about Russia today. But if he's suggesting that Jeremy Corbyn is right on Russia, then he is suggesting, as Seamus Mill, Jeremy Corbyn's spokesman today, said, that in actual fact, Russia was framed for this. That is indeed what Owen Jones is suggesting by going down that path today. Russia was not framed for this. Russia's responsible. We've had the intelligence. Even many Labour Party MPs have supported, understood that, and Jeremy Corbyn is completely wrong on that. And the fact that Aaron Banks is his bedmate would merely suggest why and how far wrong he is on this. And that is the reason we have to look right now for resolute, firm action, Britain leading on this, and then bringing in our allies to follow that up with other measures going forward from there.
OK, so is that what you're saying, Owen, that Russia was framed?
No, I'm not saying that. What Jeremy Corbyn did today was literally directly quote what Theresa May, the Prime Minister, herself said on Monday, that either Russia was responsible or that because of their own, I can't remember, their irresponsibility, they've let weapons fall into the hands of others. He directly quoted Theresa May's own words, which suggested herself, the Prime Minister, that somebody else could be responsible and was heckled as a result. Look, I remember, Ken, you'll remember this as well. I remember during the general election, after a despicable terrorist walked into a nightclub and detonated himself and killed huge numbers of little girls, of teenage girls. And then he spoke out, yes, he was isolated, and said, we have to look, yes, at the war on terror and its role, for example, and also cuts to the security services and to the police. And do you know what I was told by pundits, by MPs, Labour MPs, some of them, who texted me full of anger, this is the end of the Labour Party. And do you know what happened? Public opinion and what the media and the political elite think are often very, very different indeed. And sometimes you do need to have courage to speak out against what is often, and I know this all too well, a suffocating groupthink in both the media, of which I'm a member, often a dissenting member, and of course the political elite. If Theresa May herself says this, and the one which it could be the Russian regime or another actor, then we should listen to that. But I would say what we could agree on is that the Russian regime is a gangster regime of thugs. There are lots of competing factions. I know one Russian dissident today said that Vladimir Putin, a disgusting homophobic authoritarian leader, by the way, that he may not have ordered it himself, that it could have been another wing of what is basically a coalition of thugs, oligarchs and gangsters. So the fact is we have to know who is individually responsible, every single individual who is responsible for these heinous acts on British soil, and they need to be taken. They need to be incarcerated. They need to languish in prison for what they did. But we need to know who was responsible, because time after time again, Libya, Iraq, Helmand province, we were told that you've got to listen to what the government says. Anybody who dissents is a traitor or a coward or a stooge. And that led to catastrophe. Enough is enough. We've got to have a debate. The leader of the opposition is doing his job by opposing and critiquing government measures, and indeed he went further than them by calling for legislation to deal with that. And I would also just quickly add, he expressed his solidarity with Russia's democratic opposition, who are extremely courageous individuals. Theresa May didn't say a single word in solidarity with the dissidents who were persecuted by that regime, and that's something we should also do as well, all of us.
We started with Owen, so final word to you, Alan.
Well, I think obviously we have a long way to go here in dealing with Russia. Russia has, for several years now, been acting with impunity when it comes to actions like state-sponsored assassinations, invasions of neighbouring countries, raining death on Syrian civilians, similar things around the world, going across in Ukraine where it still is today. And we've done very little. We did very little at the time of the Litvinenko assassination in London, which Russia was also responsible for. It's time that we got serious with Russia. It's not just time that we got serious, but it's time that our fellow allies, who've also suffered from election interference, from fake news emanating from Russia, should also come out on that. Owen is right. This is a government of corrupt kleptocrats, but he's wrong to suggest that it isn't all tied down to Vladimir Putin. This system exists because of one godfather who dominates the system. It may well be that one of his lieutenants gave the order to do this, but it's all part of the same corrupt state mechanism, and that is why a strong response to the Russian state is what is required, and that once again is what Jeremy Corbyn has missed in this whole debate. He has missed the fact that whether it was Putin or one of his lieutenants, it's the same system, and as a result we have to strike back against that system and show we will not tolerate this kind of behaviour on British soil, and nor should our allies on their soil either.
Fascinating to speak to both of you as always. Thank you, gentlemen.